Welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who was last seen responding to a distress beacon emanating from a derelict spaceship orbiting Tallon IV.
Oh, I wish. Tim Longo.
You wish. You could really rock those boots and with those spiked kneecap things that she has. Super cool. If you've heard the name Tallon IV, you might have guessed that we're starting a new series this week on Metroid Prime. And we should say in advance, we are playing via the remaster. I did not own this on the GameCube. I had the sequel, but I think I borrowed the original. So I did not have it for the GameCube lying around. Otherwise, I would have played it there. But
I used to, and then I got rid of it. I kicked myself.
I don't know why you do these things.
Yeah, well, I've done a pretty good job purging, so I don't have a lot
Fair.
to my name. But yeah,
I have all the games, that I bought. If I had bought it, it would be here somewhere. But this was one that I don't think I think I borrowed it. So it's so it's the second of our games where we're kind of looking at Nintendo first-person shooters, and this one's a little different in some ways, which are interesting. We've had one that was a licensed title and kind of innovative in GoldenEye 007, and now we're switching gears to this. And it's interesting. We're doing two Nintendo shooters also made by Western developers, which is a little more specific than we meant to when we started this little miniseries, but it's noteworthy, I think. I don't know that they've done a lot of first-person shooters sort of closer to home with Nintendo. You might know better than I. My knowledge of the catalog is not extensive.
Yeah, I mean Splatoon.
Sure, that's very modern.
Yeah, but no. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I think that this era was also a time, I think, when, because first-person shooters were so big, it was a time when I think a lot of these companies that weren't known for them were partnering with developers, or in this case, supporting developers that they wanted to be focused around this, to break into that and because shooters were so prominent in the West, maybe that's, my memory is that's kind of where people were going, especially because I feel like, let's see, if you take, for instance, this is a totally random example, but Capcom and Lost Planet, which was, I think, a third-person shooter, but it was like, that's another example, I think, of especially Japanese publishers, who weren't known for doing these kinds of games.
Yeah, that would have just been out a couple of years later, right? Because it would have been Xbox, right? It was original Xbox Lost Planet.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And that one might have been ultimately. Yeah, I don't remember exactly the development. That might have been actually them. But point being, they were trying to figure out how to transition into this space. You know, especially Eastern publishers. So yeah. This is a very unique story, which I know we'll get into with retro and just kind of starting this game over again, just like flooded me with memories about just how different it is. I mean, we're also playing the remastered, which I believe has altered controls, right? Because it has more of a dual stick, even though the lock-on is still there. Because you have dual sticks, you can still strafe and look at the same time and all that. So,
was the GameCube not dual sticks?
Well, it had dual sticks.
Oh, it had that weird stick, right?
Yeah, but I don't think it was. I thought it was lock on. I'll have to go back and look. I'll have to do some research on that. But I think that I feel like the remastered. One of the big deals about the remastered was because it was on the Switch. They were boasting, with updated dual stick controls, but I'll go look and see.
I'm sure they're updated. It definitely had a lock on, and in fact, I think there are going to be bosses where it's going to be like you don't want to use the lock on if you can avoid it, because it's hard to hit the the better targets, like, something that's closer to you, like, I don't know, a head or something like that, because it's, it focuses on the body or whatever. Some of those things, some of those edges may be smoothed out, so it's going to be hard to exactly replicate the experience with this, but yeah, we'll talk about it, because there's a lot, I think, to say about the original game for sure. And having just maybe 3 years ago streamed Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, just that recently, I think was the year of the pandemic, first year of the pandemic. I maybe played that around that time. It's remarkable how good that game still looked. I think I played it on the Wii just because it was a little easier to hook up to my TV or through the game, whatever, the capture device. But it was remarkable, especially in was it progressive scan mode or whatever, that it looked really quite remarkable. Like, how does this game look this good, and it's 20 years old or whatever? I think they really did a good job of some graphical choices that they made, and it looks unlike a lot of things at the time. Much like when we talked about Halo, some of the choices they made. We did have one email saying, "Come on, that game doesn't look that good." Or whatever, but at the time it definitely stood apart. So anyway, let's as we typically do, let's set the game in its time. It's interesting that this is a game where we've played already 4 games from this year, which is a lot. It might be one of the most played years on the cast. I don't know if it quite has the whole title there, but it's probably close. Or it might be tied now that we have 5. But anyway, we played Hitman 2, Silent Assassins, way back as our second ever game. We played Eternal Darkness for Halloween, not last year, but the year before. And we've, of course, played Ratchet and Clank and Morrowind, which Morrowind I think we played early last year. Or early to mid last. That one we spent a lot of episodes on, so early to mid last year maybe. So those are the games of the era. I guess.
Did you mention Animal Crossing? Did I mention?
Oh no! You know what? I didn't type that because I was typing so many others. So actually, this might be the most year with.
And then Kingdom. Didn't you mention Kingdom Hearts?
Oh my God! And Kingdom Hearts was in 2002. My goodness, my research is bad here. Thank you. This is definitely the king of the hill, I think, in terms of games we've played from a single year. We might have to take a break from 2002 for a while. I don't know.
We have to ban 2002.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, yeah, wow, that's a murderer's row, because there's a lot of other good games that also came out this year. I want to first mention the shooters, which are some on consoles, mostly on PC. The one console one I thought worth talking about was Time Splitters 2. Yeah, we mentioned Time Splitters a lot when we were discussing GoldenEye 007, because some of the developers went on to found that studio and work on the Time Splitters games. It was also the year of Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which I think was a PC game.
Yeah, that was what were they called at the time? It was a year. What was the name of that company? But they went on to become Infinity Ward, and they started.
Oh, they were like 2042 games or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Jedi Knight 2, Battlefield 1942, and of course, No One Lives Forever 2, the best Bond game ever made. As somebody mentioned to us in email, and they're not wrong. Another game, by the way, which visually holds up very well because of their choices as far as texturing and things like that. Excellent. Very, very good looking game. The first one looked pretty good, but the second one, they really nailed it. And of course, because this is the this game came out, I think, on the year anniversary of the GameCube. So we're in the, still largely the first sort of full calendar year of the GameCube, because it came out in like September in Japan and November in the US in 2001. We've got a lot of games coming out for that. We already mentioned Animal Crossing and Eternal Darkness, but we also had Wind Waker, the Resident Evil remake, on which I believe all later remakes have been based. Super Mario Sunshine. I threw in here James Bond 007 Nightfire, which I think was a GameCube title as well. I could be wrong about that, but that's my recollection. As just a few others. On the Game Boy Advance, we had Metroid Fusion. And then here are a few other titles of interest. Dark Cloud 2, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, great game that I like very much. Splinter Cell, Warcraft 3, which is notable, I think, most because it's had a little mod called Defense of the Ancients, which went on to be a whole big thing. I don't think I've mentioned Neverwinter Nights yet. And little title, I wouldn't say that could, but, maybe that couldn't, Jedi Starfighter, which came out towards the beginning of the year.
Oof.
I know that was a little rough on Jedi Starfighter. I'm sorry. You're a
second. Oh no, I just meant the list.
Oh, the year. This is a year. This is a killer year. Absolutely killer. All killer, no filler. At least
I think the legend goes 1998 and 2002, right? Were the two?
No. I think it's 2005.
Oh, okay.
I think it's 2005 because wasn't Half-Life 2 in 2005? I'm looking that up now because I think that's because I was
maybe it was 2000.
Oh no, 2004.
4.
No, it's 98 and 2004, which are my bookends of my LucasArts career. That's right. I was interviewed once, and they said, "Wow, you had the killer on either end of your career." I was like, "Yeah, it was all me." So yeah, good. Those are a good couple of years, but this is a strong contender as a great game, gaming year of all time. A lot of twos in there and stuff, a lot of sequels, but still, I mean, these are all, they're good sequels. If you're going to have a bunch of sequels, these are some good sequels to have. I think, and and of course, there's a reason why we've drawn a lot of games from this year. I mean, I would love to play Wind Waker again. Besides, so a lot of good games from this year, and there are a lot of other games as well. But these are the ones. I think that Resident Evil might have been one of the Capcom 6, later 5, because they ended up canceling one of them, and it might have been the first one. And I think that they kind of used that engine to do some other things. That's my recollection. Don't quote me on that, but it's kind of what I remember. So it's also kind of notable from that standpoint. Anyway,
yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it, I think, quite a bit with Metroid, but there were. I feel like true to form for Nintendo, first couple years of a Nintendo platform launch, Nintendo was always fairly good, and I guess some might say this might be a bit of their challenge over the years compared to, say, Sony and PlayStation. They were always good at, I feel like, curating their catalog for the most part, and so they would kind of double down and focus on certain titles, and really make sure that those are the front running titles. And Resident Evil Remake, I remember, of course, Resident Evil 4 eventually to Metroid Prime, Eternal Darkness, ones we've played a lot of. But it's like, if you have a GameCube, there's like 5 games that probably everyone owns, you know what I mean? Because It's like, those are the games. And this ended up being, and Wind Waker, of course, but Prime ended up being, I think, a little bit of a surprise, is my memory of it's Metroid, so it's going to, you hope it's going to be good, but I just remember it really for me exemplifying that system, that was very much because let's see, 2002, so Halo would have come out the previous year, and of course Halo was that for Xbox, but they're just so different, but in the same sort of space. So I just think if you put it in its time, people are still playing Halo 1 when this comes out, especially multiplayer, right? And then this is like another first person game where you're in a helmet and you're like, and it's a beloved character. And I don't know, it's just such a fascinating time for this game.
It's also worth noting that, it had a lot of influence on us because of especially the being in the helmet. I'm sure we talked about that when we discussed Republic Commando, but just that experience of being in there and seeing, her face occasionally reflected. We didn't go quite that far, but we did accentuate the fact that it was a physical helmet, right? We had the screen wipe to clean it and things like that, so that you would really feel like, you were getting gunk on your visor, and a number of HUD elements were baked into that. Were kind of justified by the fact that you had this literal helmet. So literal, more of a helmets up display, as it were. It's also worth noting, I think, that the although it didn't have the best software sales for a Nintendo platform, at least the stats I'm looking at, it did have the highest attach rate. Attach rate is how many games per console were sold. And there's only a few that did better. It looks like it's 6th on the list. Am I counting that right? Yeah, 6th on the list of all-time greats, with a little over 9.5 titles per console, which is quite high. There are some that are higher, but that is quite
that's a good point. Attach rate is exactly what I'm talking about with when it comes to what games people own for the system. And then apparently it also was the top selling Metroid game until Metroid Dread, which was the recent one,
which was just came out last year sometime, maybe
2022. 2022.
Yep. So it was, I don't think, obviously the other ones didn't. Sequels rarely sell as well. In general, I mean, there are certainly exceptions, but in general, you sort of, you maybe hit your peak. Maybe if it's a sleeper hit, people are like, oh, I missed out on that, and they want to make sure they get the next one, and they kind of get that bandwagon. That's kind of the other pattern. But generally, you see a trend falling off. That's interesting about Dread, though. I guess that one reviewed so very well, and
Switch
Metroid fans were super hungry. And there were a lot of Switches out there. So, I'm sure that the Switch sold far more units than the GameCube did. Because I remember it was not. In fact. They are coming up on... Oh, I don't have the console numbers here. I have how many games they've sold. Almost 1 billion games sold on the Nintendo Switch, according to this, which who knows how up to date it is. They may have passed that by now. Tears of the Kingdom came out last week. They have surpassed this number, I'm sure. They sold like 10 million on the first day or something like that, which is remarkable. Anyway... So definitely this was a system that had a lot of games that people wanted to play. The Switch is getting up there too. It's almost at 7.5, which is quite good as well. So anyway, sort of had a attach rate on my brain.
Republic Commando is mentioned on the Metroid Prime Wikipedia because
really?
It says under the legacy section, it says the gameplay and HUD influence was compared to first-person shooters such as Geist and Republic Commando, Star Wars Republic Commando.
There you go.
Which is true, but funny.
It's because I've been out there preaching the good word for years, Tim. About
I think so. Somebody added that.
I'll have to go see the source, see if that's an interview. It would not surprise me to learn that was, because I'll talk about anything people ask me. No, it's in a review. Interesting. Okay, well, maybe someday I'll take a look. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about retro. We did a tiny bit of research before the show started It's probably worth noting up front that I didn't work on a project with him, but he was still at the studio when I arrived for maybe a year of overlaps, or it would have been a few years with you, and you actually tested Shadows a little bit, Shadows of the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Hay Hutchinson, who literally wrote the book on real-time cameras and video games, was a Retro Studios employee. He went there soon after leaving LucasArts, around when the studio would have been founded. Mark, sadly, is no longer with us. He passed in 2008, I think we said. So it has been a while. But he left a mark on the industry. He had a lot of games under his belt, both at LucasArts and before. And then, of course, he had 3 Metroid Prime games to his credit. So it's just thought I'd mention that sort of personal connection. Did you know Mark well at all? I didn't have a lot of a couple, but not a lot of interactions with him myself.
No, I mean, it did. I definitely, yeah. We met and talked many times, but I don't think I'd say I knew him well. But he was a great person, great guy,
Yeah.
and just super. He was one of those early, because like you mentioned, I was in QA at the time, and then working my way into design, and he was one of those like perfect examples of a programmer that you meet young when you're early in your career, and you just get such a positive experience from them, and they're very helpful and open and knowledgeable, and just seems like a genius, but still very approachable. And he was co-project lead with John Knowles on Shadows of the Empire, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, he would come to the QA pit and just was like one of the people there. So it was, yeah, he was a good influence.
Yeah, I remember other engineers, that I worked with at the time talking about him being the person to go to if you were trying to understand particularly camera transforms, but often just like 3D math problems. Like, I want to figure out how to do this, and he would know how to work that out. A lot of that experience was coming to the industry at that time, but he was kind of leading that, at least at LucasArts, and he was a real reference point for a lot of the engineers there as that company, as LucasArts was making that transition. I think the year I went there was the year they said there were going to be all 3D games, from then on out, and that was good to have somebody like Mark HH, as we would call him, around. So he cast a long shadow for sure. But let's talk more about Retro itself. It was founded around 2000 with some investment from Nintendo, specifically to work on the GameCube. And then they grew their investment later and ultimately brought them to be first party. Would have been around the time actually this game came out. They kicked off. They went straight into building 4 games, and when Mr. Miyamoto came to visit, apparently only one of them showed any promise, and that was a game called Megaforce, whose engine he thought maybe had the potential to become something good, and so he said they should put Metroid in it. So that's how this game kind of came to be. And they basically canceled the other projects shortly thereafter. Unfortunately, had a small layoff as well, about 1/6 of the staff, I think, and focused all their development on this game. And the game is great. That's why we're talking about it. So I'm glad that fateful day happened and they refocused that, because I can't imagine a world without Metroid Prime.
It takes that is definitely, I guess for us in our circles or what have you, it's definitely one of those legendary decisions where you have somebody like a Miyamoto come in and say, there's something here. Why don't you do,
Why don't you take one of our flagship properties?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to like overstate it, but that moment when somebody has they see some sort of vision where they're like, this is a 3D. I don't know what this original game was, but let's assume it was a first-person game of some kind. Let's take this 3D engine and do something with it from a franchise that was never known to do that. It's like it's like when we played and talked about both Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. It's like they were probably thinking along the same lines with how are we going to do this with Metroid, and then he saw a connection point there of like, this could work. And I was also scanning the wiki.
Oh, that's good. I see what you did there.
Nice. No, I did not do that. That was not intentional. I'm scanning everything in this room right now.
That's what I do. That's what I do now.
Exactly. But Wired, I noticed a pull quote from Wired saying that, this game was, I'm butchering the quote. I don't have it in front of me now, but, this game was was the game that sort of, ripped the first person shooter genre away from Doom in a way and did something completely different with it and unexpected, and just like that fork in the road for both retro and Metroid, and then, yeah. And then having it, which is again part of the point of the podcast, having it also have a legacy and an influence on other games because they took a risk, and did something way outside. Like I feel like with Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time, you can kind of like see how they got there.
Right.
Once 3D cameras were invented, and once you think about the N64 and what it was doing, what N64 was supposed to be good at, hardware rendering and all that. So you can see it. But this one is like, wow, how did you get from here to here? How did you get
from your 2D? I mean, it's not exactly a side scroller, but kind of side scroller inflected, exploration game, that had a lot of shooting in it. How did you think, oh, you know what would be cool is if we took that iconic character and made it so you couldn't see them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's an interesting choice.
A whole new level design, right? Challenges. Yes. When you have that. I mean, part of Metroidvanias, is like seeing the world, seeing the map in that sort of like very, lock and key kind of way. But, when you're in a visor, it's like a whole different set of challenges. It's just fascinating. And then ironically, the modern, if you quote unquote, well, they're supposedly working on a Metroid Prime 4, but the modern, as we just mentioned with Dread, Metroid games have gone back to the 2D, the essentially 2.5D format, and there, right. There was another one on the Switch, right? There was one before Dread that I played, I think. Was that on Switch?
No, it was on the 3DS.
Oh, that's right. That was on 3DS. Oh, that game was good though. That was a really good game.
Yeah, it's really quite good. I think Dread. I am too, and I played a bunch of it, and now I didn't quite finish it because it started getting pretty.
It's very hard.
Started getting busy, but I will look it up here.
I think it was the same people that did Dread.
Was it Samus Returns?
Oh, that's right. It was a remake of the one of the Game Boy ones or something. Yeah, it was. Anyway, that was good. But then, point being is that's the formula that they're using right now.
Yeah, it was a Metroid 2 remake.
Yeah, from the Game Boy. Anyway, a little off track, but interesting.
Yeah. So they did that. That was in 2017. They had Dread last year. Yeah, they had gone back to these sort of 2D, and we mentioned that Metroid Fusion. Did I mention the Metroid Fusion came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2002 as well? So they had both a 2D and a 3D Metroid in the same year. An embarrassment of riches, really. I'm glad that we have, we have the Metroid Prime trilogy. I hope that they re-release all three of them. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, why wouldn't you? Maybe they'll package 2 and 3 together or something like that, or maybe they'll keep kind of sort of dribbling them out until until 4 comes out. And Retro is again working on 4. They've also taken hold of the Donkey Kong Country series, so like Tropical Freeze and things like that. They're fully first party now, and they work on these things. I do think Metroid Prime 4 started with somebody else, however, because Retro was the Donkey Kong studio now, and it went back to him. Do you remember who it was?
It was Bandai Namco.
Right.
Yeah, they may still be involved in some way. I don't know, but they were working with one of their groups, which we actually have some colleagues who are involved. Looking at the timeline, so Dread is, I think, a sequel to Fusion. Is my memory. Samus Returns is the original was called Metroid 2: Return of Samus.
Yep.
And then the remake was Samus Returns.
Yeah, Metroid Samus Returns. Yeah,
Metroid Samus Returns. So not confusing at all. But
Prime, not at all.
Prime comes out after. Prime takes place after Zero Mission, which is interesting. Which is Metroid 1. So Metroid, and then Zero Mission's a remake of that, which was
okay.
And then Prime.
Where does Federation Force fit into all of this? Is my question.
Federation Force is right before Metroid 2.
Of course, you've got it right there in front of you. You wouldn't have known that. You have the page open.
I do. Well, me and story chronology. I need to.
I know.
So all the Prime games,
a little bit more straightforward, at least. You don't have branching universes and things like that.
Yeah, it's linear, yeah. But I did not actually know that all the Prime games take place in between Metroid and Metroid 2 and Super Metroid. So, weird.
Oh. I think I did know that because of what happens in the ship. I think I did know that, actually.
The ship we were just in.
We were in at the beginning of the game, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which we'll get to. At the time, I think I knew that. Like doing it now, I wouldn't have. I didn't even stop to think about that because I certainly no longer care. But at the time, I might have.
I'm gonna have to replay them all in order.
Yeah, from the beginning, all the Metroids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good. That's you could do worse. You could do worse than replaying all the Metroid games. I would like to play Dread as well. So, but anyway. So I mean, the only other one that we haven't mentioned was Other M, which is I would say largely decried by fans of the series because it takes the character of Samus a little bit in a direction I think most people didn't agree with. I think that's the big knock on the game. I think the game actually would have been if she had been a silent protagonist more or less as she had been in all the other games, it might have been fine, but they definitely didn't go that direction, and so it is not beloved. Let's say, although I understand the combat feels pretty good,
and that was Team Ninja, right?
That was Team Ninja, yep, and they kind of blew it as far as the narrative went.
It's interesting too because we definitely. I agree we should consider Metroid one of their top tier franchises, but it is historically one of the franchises that they do work with a partner on and don't do in-house. It's been that way for quite a while.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, it's not, I think it is, I mean, it's not a franchise.
It doesn't sell
most of the time.
Right.
Not, it doesn't sell Zelda or Mario numbers.
Not at all. Yeah.
Not at all. So, I sort of understand why they do that. They have a lot of characters who are kind of like that, who are, they're not, I don't want to say second tier because they're not in that way, but they are kind of second tier in terms of sales. And so they kind of spread out their effort on those things. They know where their big money makers are. I mean, there's like 1 billion games that have Mario in the title. There's plenty of Zelda games, although they don't have tons of spin-offs of that. Not none, but not tons. I guess they've had a bunch on the handhelds, which would continue the 2D tradition. And then, and then, you start having the other ones. Even, I'm not sure where I would put Donkey Kong as far as that goes either. I mean, it's kind of another one where they've tended to put, other teams on it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah.
First party, but maybe separate, or they weren't even first party when they brought them to the franchise in some cases. So, so it's interesting because I think Rare was second party still when they were doing their first Donkey Kong games. So eventually, So
well, we were just talking about Donkey Kong Country with them too. Ironically, talking about
the original one, the SNES one. So,
but I don't think, I don't know. Maybe it sounds like maybe you have some numbers there, but Metroid Prime originally when it launched, I don't think it got out of single digit millions as far as sales goes. Right? It's in that kind of scale.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me see.
As a comparison, probably everyone else read as well, but recently they announced that Mario Kart 8 is at 58 million copies or something like that.
For which one?
Mario Kart 8.
Oh, yeah.
Which is on Switch and other platforms. But
yeah, it was a Wii U game originally, I think.
But that's one game.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, so it looks like it was 1.5 million in the US. It looks like ultimately it was almost 3 million copies, for Metroid Prime, and was the best-selling one until Metroid Dread came along. So,
yeah,
it was. I mean, it was reviewed extremely well at the time as well. I mean, I think people knew already it was a classic. I mean, they took one look at it and said, "Wow, this is a really good game." Definitely, there's a reason why it had a legacy, which included one Star Wars Republic Commando. So, anyway, let's talk about the beginning of the game proper. We just played up until arriving on the planet. Until I landed on that derelict ship out in space, I had forgotten that you start the game there. Totally forgot that. As a kind of tutorial area, mostly. And of course, it being a Metroid game, you have to start with the formula that she starts with everything. She's got all her, she's got a bunch of powers, more or less. She's got a grappling hook and she can turn into the morph ball. She had two visors, I guess. What else? And just the weapon and the charge version
missile
of the weapon. Oh, and missiles and the missile launcher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
bunch
of powers. Not all the powers that she will acquire over the adventure, but enough to be like, oh, this is what the fully powered up character looks like, kind of feel, which is a common Metroid trope. And I don't, I hadn't thought about it till just this moment. What do you think about that? Is it good to get that like taste of like, oh, here are the things you're going to do, and now we're just going to take it all away? Like, how do you feel about that as a structure?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. I'm definitely mixed on it, and I think unfortunately I'm going to have kind of a cop-out answer because I'm mixed on it, and I also think it really heavily depends on the situation. Because I think in this case there's a bit of a legacy concept there because they've done it before,
right? She's just come from the first Metroid, right? Apparently.
Yeah, and so there's some of that going on, but and we've talked about it from time to time, right? Because it's like, let's see, did that happen in Castlevania? I know it happened in like Dark Forces, maybe. There's always that, right? I mean, it was just I don't know, it's just a common trope. But early in, I don't know. It's always just a little bit weird because that disempowerment that happens is tricky. I mean, I guess it's the carrot, right? They give you the carrot to kind of go and collect over time. But
and they're also teaching you a lot of the sort of idioms of the mechanics, right? That, for example, the grapple, there's going to be icons in the environment that tell you can use them, or the scanning visor, you never lose. But you're learning about scanning. You're doing a lot of scanning. You're learning about the morph ball and what you can do with the morph ball. You do have the morph bombs as well, although you don't need them for anything. The missiles in terms of locking on and firing a missile at something, locking onto multiple things. If you want, I think you might be able to do that. I can't remember if I did that or not. I think I did.
I didn't. You might be
I,
able to, but I didn't.
I think I might have.
Well, it helps.
No,
I mean,
with
the structure of Metroid games, when you see that morph ball receptacle,
right,
and you have not yet reacquired it, it's obviously good. Good telegraphing and such. It gives you something to be excited about. So
right.
you get the instinct.
Something to make note of and be like, oh, I'm going to come back here when I have that. Definitely is an experience that, like, literally every time I play a Metroid game, I'm thinking about halfway through. I go, oh man, I should have been taking notes this whole time.
Are you going to learn it this time?
I don't. Now that I've said it on the podcast, I might have to learn that. It's just I only have so many hands when I'm playing. I played it in handheld. I've been playing a lot of stuff in playing the thing mostly in handheld lately. So it's interesting. I've never done that with my Switch until this past month and a half when I've been whenever we started GoldenEye. I've never really played it in handheld mode. And now it's how I play it all the time. It's very strange. But it's very comfortable.
It's cool.
I finally caught on.
Yeah, no, I think it could be more comfortable, but I did play. Yeah, I mean, I played all of Breath of the Wild in handheld, and so that's definitely grueling. But
yeah, I'm sure there's times where you're like, man, I wish I had a pro controller in my hands. Or
something. in this case, one thing that I already noted is when you're scanning, you have to hold left trigger and then hit A and hold A down or something like that. I'm finding it hard to hold if you're scanning repeatedly, things after one after another.
Just one button. You can't.
The lock on, right?
You have to push the face button, the left face button right. They've got some face buttons on the left Joy-Con, right? Both Joy-Cons do. So the left.
I thought you had to lock on though, so you have to hold that down. You have to hold the trigger down. No? Anyway,
you have to trigger to scan. It locks on when you scan. So you just point at the thing and
Okay.
It does.
So
maybe
I'm
weird, and getting used to it is a little strange, especially because I'm like with the visors switching. I remember that felt a little more comfortable to me on the GameCube, and I think it was probably because it had that weird directional stick.
Yeah, well, we talked about it with GoldenEye, but I think it's gonna come up where, because we're playing on the remastered, it's gonna come up where Metroid. And that was my point earlier about how critical lock-on was, and that's to Wired's quote about releasing the grip of Doom because of the controller and because of the decisions that they were making. Because this was a first-person shooter technically, because it was first person and there was shooting, but it was like they were trying to sort of like. I mean, we don't know what the creative direction was, or maybe this was Miyamoto, but they were trying to, and you see this in this early level, the first thing you do, right? They teach you to lock on to just get through a force field or a door. And it's sort of like they're trying to simulate the 2D Metroid experience, but in 3D. So, and the controller was very much focused around one, even though it had that weird C-stick, there really was the primary stick. And it was very much a lock-on game, I feel like.
Right.
And it, wasn't like they weren't expecting you to aim and shoot with dual stick. And you could argue, and I think this is probably what people have already argued, is that because it was a Nintendo platform, because Nintendo does tend to want to be going after a broader audience. And first person shooters are notoriously hard on console for a lot of people to learn because of
Yeah.
the dual sticks.
Yeah.
If they made a lock-on game, you could say it's probably more accessible, right? Because
That's a good
it's
point.
I don't know if that was their goal, but you could see the argument being made where it's like, somebody was saying, these dual sticks, they're cool, Halo, whatever it is, they're cool and all, and Halo's cracked the nut, but this game was being developed before Halo came out anyway,
Yeah.
and so their solution to the dual stick problem, which is definitely mind bending for a lot of people, even today, was focusing on lock on, which was interesting because you have the previous generation, you have Zelda, Mario, right? A lot of locking on going on.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, mostly because I'm not playing with that controller, and I'm trying to think back to what that was like. I do also remember having played Metroid Prime 2 a few years ago. I think you can also lock on if you don't have a target and kind of move into strafe mode. So you can sort of, it's like you're not locking on anything particular, but you are still locking your orientation, which also helps, and so it is kind of like especially if you're going into a room where there's a bunch of enemies or whatever, and instead of trying to quickly target multiple things, you have this opportunity to kind of like, strafe fight, in that space, which is, it works pretty well. I mean, I feel like I also used it for certain, like to be able to peek around corners quickly or something like that. Like I had specific use cases where I was like, okay, I'm going to want to like lock this axis so that I can just like slide over and shoot because I know where the thing is. I can't, whenever I step out, there's a turret that's shooting at me, but I know what angles it's at. So I'll point myself in that direction and then I'll just strafe out and shoot it. So there are times where it actually, I feel like it worked to my benefit, playing that game. I don't think any of that's going to be an issue at this point. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. Because of course you have to design to the controller, and they have a different controller and they've revamped the controls. It feels different already. So there's definitely that.
Which is interesting because playing GoldenEye back to back, where they just did a straight port, and didn't do any redesign. It's not a remaster. I mean, just picking this up and playing the remaster, it's just immediately feels good. Yeah. I mean, they definitely put time into it.
Yep, and I'm glad they did. Is there anything else you want to talk about the opening level? I mean, it's the second thing they teach you is scanning, and then
which is huge. I mean, such a legacy. That's a big legacy thing. I feel like scanning just became a whole thing after this game.
Absolutely, it became part of the language of, you could argue that sort of, any number of sorts of things came out of that. I would say that's maybe the sort of prototype for like even audio logs. They just were like, instead you're going to find it and you're just going to kind of click and it's going to go and you keep moving. But I do feel like that's a thing. I mean, in Horizon Zero Dawn, I think you even have to scan to get the audio logs, right? You have to find them in the environment with her weird thing that's attached to her head and her Bluetooth basically. And you have to scan and find them that way and scan them and identify them, to get all kinds of things in the environment, to identify all kinds of things in the environment. So it's definitely got a lasting thing. I don't know.
Batman, I mean, the Arkham games, like, you can just see like, I mean, I remember Unreal, the original Unreal single player game having logs of some kind. So that might've been before this, but it's just a very unique, engaging way of just, instead of going to just find a thing that's laying there, like hunting around the environment through your visor, really just fully integrated. So scanning, I think the flow of the original, of the opening level, introducing you to the boss over time, like it's just really good world building and set dressing, and then getting to the boss and having it be exciting but simple, and feeling empowering. But
and
the main
pretty easy to dodge as well. Like it's basically got one attack, and you can see it charge up, and you're just gonna move. You're locked on, and you just gotta move, and it's kind of introducing you to like, this is how you're gonna have to fight enemies.
Yeah. Well, and I mean the main thing that a lot of my notes revolve around not necessarily as much about the sort of like training aspect of the level and the details of the gameplay and stuff, because it is very much like it's very forgiving. And then of course, I think doesn't Super Metroid start with a level where you have to run out based on a time or two?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's like a Metroid thing. But the main thing that just like I mentioned earlier, like all the memories come rushing back is seeing Metroid in 3D. I mean, it's a simple statement, but it's so, for me as a Metroid fan, and we talked about it, I'm sure, a lot when we played Super Metroid. It's just so. Oh, and then we mentioned that one on 3DS. They just did such a good job. The music is amazing, and just all of the audio design is amazing, and the details of like you do feel. And as a fan, the first time you put the helmet on, or you're looking through the helmet, which is not something that you ever got to do until this moment, in this game. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
Just to see Metroid from another perspective where you just did not anticipate it. And like you said earlier, it almost doesn't make sense. Like, why would they make this Metroid?
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah, I mean, it takes real vision, as you pointed out, to see that and see that as a possibility. I think that another thing that I really appreciate, and we'll talk about this more going forward, is that the audio design really puts you in the really makes you feel like you're that character. There's lots of little like little hisses and things like that. Mm-hmm. As for example, as she jumps, right, there's a little hiss from her, like she shoots little gusts out of her feet and things like that. Is my recollection, because of course you can't see your feet, but that's what I'm hearing. Is like, oh yeah, she's assisted, right? Her suit does all this stuff, and you've got. They'll show you the character a number of times over the course of the game. So of course you start seeing her in the suit and coming up out of the gunship, which I was looking at it while it was loading. I was like, do those things, like, are those guns? Like, no, there's like 8 different, I don't know, retro thrusters or whatever on the bottom of the thing, and then guns all over the top. I looked in the extras menu at the beginning of the game, because I guess unlocks trigger like models and stuff that you can look at. I don't remember if that was true of the original game. I think it was, though. Like you get concept art basically and things like that, monsters and logs and things like that you can look at on the start screen. The other thing I want to call out, we'll go deeper into this in the future too, because we'll spend more time with things like the map and also the sort of research UI, is that the UI is very 3D and science fiction-y as well, from the opening UI, which like soars you through this like abstractly rendered thing with Metroids and all of that, which is all super cool. And we'll come back to that, because I think it was a super interesting UI design at the time. One of the ones that I was like, wow, that's really, I've never seen anything quite like that. There were some others from around that era that I remember being pretty interesting, like the Beyond Good and Evil, I think had some interesting elements in its UI, but nothing like this. This was creme de la creme.
It's very holistic.
Yeah.
Even the inventory menu and all that stuff, it feels sort of like it came up in your visor.
Yeah.
Kind of rounded.
Yeah. It's really, really excellent. Okay, I think we'll put a pin in it there, unless you have anything you want to mention.
No, I'm excited to
more.
Playing this game.
You just want more.
It's a good game.
It's a good Metroid game.
Yeah.
It's a pretty great game.
But we have a lot more to come. So.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of game left. I think I will I will reveal. I'm doing this, as if I spent the time and figured out what we're going to play to next, but I'm just holding back and putting it in the Discord. That's not actually true. I still haven't figured out to where we're playing to next. But you'll be able to find that in the Discord, in the next couple of days. Maybe even by the time you hear this, I may have already figured that out and posted it to both Tim and to the Discord. So tune in and figure out where we're playing to next in those locations. Let's do at least a couple of emails. Well, at least one email. We're already at almost an hour, so let's try to get one in, maybe two. I've got one that's not super long. I can't remember if your first email. Oh, I remember your first email. There's our last call on the shots. Let's go ahead and hit that and one other email.
Okay. All right. Yes. Column from Calling the Shots, subject to 187, 189, 194, 208, World of Warcraft. Okay. At the end of the second episode of Doom, Tim mentions EverQuest. I would love to hear more about your experience playing this game. I also see that you never came back to WoW after 2008, but the leveling...
after episode 208.
After episode 208, but that the leveling... commit is exceptional. Oh, exponential. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to put a lot of time into the game.
40 or 45 or something like that.
Yeah,
definitely. I think we're good.
we would have to play a lot. Yeah. But Classic is still going strong. I will say that EverQuest had one of the most positive and negative impacts on my life, and maybe one of my primary inspirations for wanting to become a producer development director. When I was in high school, it was a time of homophobia, bullying, and general intolerance of people who were not mainstream, like athletes, cool kids, etc. In my small town, the type of person I was seemed rare and different, and often felt alone. And I often felt alone. But I found this community of people in my guild in EverQuest who were from all across North America. Playing a cleric, I spent a ton of time sitting, meditating, and chatting with people in my guild about these experiences. They gave me hope and a feeling of acceptance. To this day, I've never met those people in real life, but they were always there for me wherever they knew, always there for me, whether they knew it or not. It wasn't until years later that I moved to Vancouver, Canada, a much bigger and more diverse city, where I found my friends in the game dev community and realized that EverQuest was just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't had much time for MMOs, and to end the story on a sour note, I ended up quitting EverQuest because of my addicting personality to focus on school and finish my engineering degree. Wondering if you guys could talk a bit about gaming addiction, gotcha games, and how these games can take advantage of that type of personality. I suppose I'm lucky to have recognized my own issues so early in life.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's Tim's more of the designer here, but it's important for us anyway to not right. There's a degree to which if you are not an ethical designer, you could lean into the fact. I mean, I have heard talks from people that would just make your toes curl about targeting people, using psychology against them, whether they're addictive or not, to just like squeeze money out of people. And it just feels so gross. Of course, there's the terminology around mobile games in particular with whales, which is like, just like it's a gross term. And I have seen talks where like I thought somebody was being satirical, while I, in the first couple of minutes, and then I was like, oh no, this person actually believes and practices this. Like this is their, this is how they squeeze people for money. There are those folks out there, and I will never work for them. So that's what I have to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't, based on Colin's email, I don't think I am quite as, I'd have to be quite as careful as he does with this, but I definitely have I devote myself to games in a really big way and have a hard time. Most recently, Marvel Snap is one that I would give. And I think as a designer, the problem is that I often see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that they're being overly manipulative in that game, but it is a free to play card game, and so there's certain things that are going to come with it. And for about 5 months or so, I was deep in that hole, and spending money and et cetera, et cetera. But I could see that sort of behavior. And so, I mean, the only thing I'd offer to your question is, and it's just from a developer's perspective, like Brett was just saying, kind of being aware of what the strategies are out there. But it is something that we talk about at work all the time, and we talked about it 343 as well. Most recently, I do feel a little hopeful for the industry because I feel like I hear it being talked about more earnestly than ever before.
Yeah.
Where people, to Brett's point, they're the people who know what they're doing. Well, generally people kind of recognize it one way or the other. But there's, most people know that it's something to be aware of and to think about and to not take for granted and to try to be responsible with and talk about, rather than, of course we would do this because it's going to make us more money, or of course we would do this because it'll make players play longer. Like the example being, we have a really engaging gameplay. Let's make, in EverQuest case, there's a great example. Let's make the leveling curve really punishing, so
Yeah.
people have to play longer. And so there's simple tuning there, right, where you do the math. And so I just think in the old days it was much more of a, let's just do it, let's just, finger guns, and you're just like, yeah, this is going to be great. And now I'm obviously generalizing, but I at least hear people talking about like the ethical side of it much more so than ever. But I guess at the end of the day, there is a business to be had too. So finding that balance is definitely tricky. To speak a little bit to his EverQuest points, when he mentioned playing a cleric, and actually when he said cleric, like I have a very specific cleric in my head who was a online friend of ours that was in our guild, and June's about to act up.
Oh, here it comes.
All right, folks.
Let's hear what she has to say about it.
She has a lot to say about EverQuest, but I think I mentioned this on the cast, but maybe it was when we played WoW. But I went back to EverQuest and reinstalled it because there's like a free version or something, and man, did the memories come back! Like, so I agree with you, Colin. Some of my most fundamental gaming memories are in EverQuest still to this day, and it was about community building. And in a couple cases, we ended up meeting people in real life and became friends with them, and I still talk to a couple of them today. So yeah, good fond memories. But good for you for recognizing your limitations as well, because that game ate up my life for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I have some friends who really, took it too far and had trouble in other parts of their life because they couldn't let go.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about what we should be aiming for here, I mean, like, I think Aristotle's golden mean is a useful thing to look at, which is, there's a middle road, there's a moderation that is the healthy way to live your life, right? You don't want to play games that don't engage you. Like, that would be going too far in the opposite direction. But you don't want to play games that engage you so much that you can't think of anything else. Mm-hmm. And there is a middle road there where it's like, this engages me enough, but I can set it aside and play it in a healthy manner. The unfortunate thing as developers is it's hard to know where that dial is for any given individual who might play your game. So it can be difficult. There are people who will be motivated to do every possible thing in your game. And they will drive themselves to distraction doing it. I've had games that I've played that way. where there were things that were extremely difficult for me to do that I pushed myself through to do over a course of multiple days. It took me like 3 days to beat one level in Super Mario Galaxy, because I was like, I only have this 1 or 2 stars, and literally it was at the absolute limits of what I was able physically to do. I probably couldn't do it now because that was 10 years ago. I probably couldn't do it at all. So that window has closed, thankfully. But I was in another semi-retirement period at the time. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I can do this. I can spend 3 days trying to beat this damn level. Not all at once, not 24 hours a day, but just like a lot over 3 days. So I don't know. We have to try to find that space where we're not going to have too many people falling, certainly to either side of that golden mean, if we do our jobs right. So hopefully we will continue to try to do that. And I do think, ethical free to play has been a discussion for quite some time. There are people who are out there who are thinking about it all the time, and it's a very viable approach to building games, and there are ways to do it, in a way that's not destructive. So,
well, and there's an interesting concept of being careful about what metrics you're focusing on when you're making your game. The reason I bring this up as a big MMO fan and player over the years is, we would call them KPIs,
which is key performance indicators. Yes.
When you make, obviously there's a business, right? So money is always one of those discussed KPIs, but number of hours played is often a go-to. But there was an interesting this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll make it quick. When Sony had come in to LucasArts to start Star Wars Galaxies up, I remember being in a pitch meeting or something like that where they were presenting, and I was there.
I was in that one too.
Yeah, you were probably there too. We were just there, sort of like as fellow developers, advising.
Star Wars people.
Is this a good idea or not? Kind of blah blah blah. But Raf Koster was there, and he made an interesting comment because he was coming off of Ultima Online, of course, and EverQuest was at its peak at that point, and I was playing a lot of it. In fact, maybe EverQuest 2 is even coming out soon. But anyway, they were talking about hours played and how much time people play the game in a given day. And he made an interesting comment that even there with an MMO, you'd think that's the key performance indicator, like how long is someone playing this game? But he said something that was like, at the time, it was revelatory for me, because I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't even thought of that the longer you have somebody playing the game, the more customer service costs.
Yeah. Because
people are playing, all the time, and thus having challenges or have opinions or whatever, finding bugs. And so there's, even in hours played, there's a balance of like, how do you exit somebody from the game, giving them enough time to rest, recuperate in normal everyday life, to have them come back into the game later and enjoy it even more. Yeah. You don't actually want them to play all day.
Right.
You want them to.
There's also server costs, right? You're paying for
server costs. Yeah.
So your ideal player, for an MMO, doesn't actually play the game. They pay the subscription, but they don't.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's your platonic ideal of like how much money you could get from somebody if it's a standard model, subscription model, like EverQuest was at the time. But I mean, obviously that would be, for me, that would be too far on the other side of like, well, they're not engaged with your game. They're not playing it.
Yeah, that's right. You want them to enjoy it, but you don't want them to have to. And I would say EverQuest specifically was tuned in a way you do have to put a lot of hours in to really get the most out of it. That's not a dabbling kind of game. And I think where WoW had actually, though people became obsessed with WoW, of course, too, because it was so good, there was more of a balance there than compared to EverQuest, if you can believe it. Because classic WoW was still pretty punchy.
And they had things too to encourage like playing for a period of time and going away, like the hour of power type.
Exactly. Well. So the resting bonuses. Yeah.
Right. they had ways of doing that. So it's like you were incentivized to play, but not a crazy amount because of now I'm not getting my 2x XP or whatever. So it's there's ways to develop towards that. I still played too much World of Warcraft when I was playing World of Warcraft, so it didn't entirely work for me. All right, let me get to this email because it's quick. We had 2 emails on the same subject. This one, I'm taking Nolan Filters, which is Calamity Nolan, putting some useless James Bond trivia to use. It's something we also heard from Guy Morgan. Both of them sent me the same link, which is a video, which will be in the show notes. Hey, Dev Game Club game devs. Oh, I like how you tried to trip me up there. Calamity Nolan here, Menace of Discord and Twitch, ready to curse you with knowledge. I'm enjoying the GoldenEye episodes and wanted to share my favorite James Bond fact. Did you know the James Bond theme song, the one debuted in Dr. No and featured prominently in the GoldenEye 007 video game, was not originally meant for the world's most famous spy? Did you know this, Tim?
I did not.
Okay. Composer Monty Norman wrote the melody for the song Bad Sign, Good Sign in a canceled stage musical based on V.S. Naipaul's novel A House for Mr. Biswas, and it starts off with the following lyrics.
What?
I was born with this unlucky sneeze, and what is worse, I came into the world the wrong way round. Pundits all agree that I'm the reason why my father fell into the village pond and drowned. Yep, that's the song. He adapted it into the song we recognize today when brought on to score the first Bond movie. He's included a link to a recording of Bad Sign, Good Sign from Anya Norman's album Completing the Circle, featuring a man with an Indian accent singing over a sitar backing track. It's really an uncanny listen, and I highly recommend it. You'll never hear the James Bond theme the same way again. Thanks as always for the cast, Nolan. Yeah, when I got this first from Guy and then also from Calamity, I listened to it, and I've been cursed. It's something. It's really
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. It's going to ruin it.
It's just quirky. That's all. It's very funny to hear him sing. When I heard it the first time, I thought I was being pranked. Like I was like, this isn't real, but I didn't know the name Monty Norman. So I'm like, so then of course I had to look it up, and then Nolan wrote this email which explained it all a little bit more detail. I could not believe that this was true, but it is true, and I've been cursed with that knowledge and with that video. So thank you to both Guy and Calamity.
So this is the dun 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 dun.
Yes,
that part.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. I'm sorry, my
but not the dun dun.
No, that's the John Barry stuff.
Right, because that's what you're talking about that with Grant. Yeah,
with Grant. Yeah,
there's two different. Right.
Two different. Yeah, even though he said Monty Norman doesn't give him any credit, that was the John Barry magic that got added in there. So, to my knowledge, that part is not adapted from any plays or musicals having to do with V.S. Naipaul. So that's, until I'm proven wrong, that's what I'm going to choose to believe.
Wild.
Those emails, of course, were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. Thanks so much for those. We have a whole bunch to catch up on, so at some point we're going to have to do that, Tim. We also love to get your reviews. We haven't had one in a little while. I get all the Apple ones, so if you send those are great. But we don't do any advertising, so if you've already given us a review, tell a friend. Tell 2 friends. I don't know. Whatever. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host occasionally at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And also, I believe someday you may Twitch again at a similar link. Links in the show notes. I know you're super busy, so I'm not going to even give you a hard time about it. Also in the show notes you can find our Discord, so you can get a link there and get advance notice of what games we're playing next or where to play to. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, our Discord, and our merch store are all by Mark Garcia. We appreciate you so much, Mark, and all the mods over at the Discord. Have fun escaping the exploding space platform this week, and good night.
Good night.